There we go. Okay, so I'd like to welcome everybody to this year's 2023 National Mah Jongg Card Analysis. Michele Frizzell's come back. We're very excited to have her. As you can see, this program is being recorded. I will post it to the Upper Saddle River Library YouTube page probably tomorrow. Michele has also given us an ebook that we will be sharing, which covers a lot of this analysis. I'll let her speak about that more, but I will be sharing all this in a follow-up afterwards. So I'm going to let Michele take it away as I mute myself.
Okay. How's everybody doing on this fine day? Good.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. All right, I'm going to get my presentation ready and then I'll share my screen. There's always that moment when the screen sharing happens. It's a little bit awkward, so bear with me, please. Okay. All right. Let's see. I'm gonna try that again. Here we go. All right. Can everybody see my presentation? Yes. Okay, very good. So we have the new card analysis, and I'm going to share insights, and they're not just insights, they're actionable insights. And I'm also going to share some tips. Now, we're in May, the first week in May. Has everybody gotten their card? Maybe we could start with that. Put a 1 in the chat and let me know if anyone in the room doesn't have a card yet. I'm hoping that if you don't have your card, you'll still be able to follow along and then use the ebook to look at or reference as you're studying the card. I want to say thank you first, though, to Linda for having me as a guest speaker for the library. I'm assuming that you're all patrons of the library, and so I just want to give a shout out because I would think that patronage might have gone down over the years with the internet. And so really the public libraries are just a gem to the community. So I just want to give a shout out to libraries and the Upper Saddle River Library in general. So think about those chickens as we go. Are you frazzled, or do you feel confident, or do you feel like you can slay the table? Well, sort of slay the table. We want to be kind, of course. While you think about the card and how you're feeling while you play, I just want to go over the agenda for today's talk. We're going to do a quick baseline so you understand what my analysis is based on. Then we're going to dig into nitty-gritty analytics and some insights. And then I will share findings with actionable commentary. And then in the end, we'll give you some tips for a smooth transition. Hopefully there'll be time for Q&A, and any time remaining, I'm hoping that we'll be able to do a little bit of demonstration at Mahjong time. So we'll be a little flexible towards the end and just see what kind of time we have to work with. For the baseline, the first thing that you need to know is that the card comes out every April. Every now and again, I'll see social media posts where people are thinking, it's the new year, it's January, where's the card? And clearly they're new to the game. So if you're new to the game and you're wondering, why do they not send out the card in January? And my thought is that April must be their fiscal year, and maybe they just have always sent it at that time. But I'm not quite sure. That may be just an observation or an assumption, but it comes out in April and we all await the card. Oops. So when this card comes out, the rules are not going to change very much. There, on occasion, the rules do change. And this year there is a change in one of the rules, and hopefully we'll get to talk about that soon. Because they do write a booklet, this is ideal to have at least one person in your group should have this Mah Jongg Made Easy. Does everybody know about this book? It's their official guidebook. And it's a booklet. Here's one right here. I have it right by my desk. It's quite thin, you can see here. And right now, their latest copy does not actually have all the rules in it, because once they publish this, then they're always answering questions that come up in games. And sometimes they'll make a ruling that is not in that book. And to date, there are 26 rules that are not in the book. So I created a wiki on my website, and all the rules are in there. I have a wiki article with those 26 rules so that you're sure to have a comprehensive understanding of all the rules of the game. So maybe we can add a link to my wiki in that email at the end or later. So please consider visiting my website for that information. The methods used to describe the hands stay the same. Those colors, letters, and numbers, those all stay the same. The categories typically stay the same. This year we have addition hands back, but for the most part, it's the 9 categories with or without addition, depending on their mood. What changes though are the combinations on the card, the shapes and the patterns that are on the card. That's what changes every year. We're going to now get into the nitty-gritty analytics and insights. First, when I do this analysis, I count line level hands and I compare one year to the next to try to see the differences that can impact playing in certain categories, because some of the categories on the card they kind of have a ripple effect with the other categories on the card. And that's why I think this process is important. The first thing that I look at is hand difficulty, the value of the hand. 66% of the hands are easy, 25 points. 21% are moderately challenging at 21%. And then the rest of them, 13%, are more difficult, and those would be the quints and the singles and pairs. Incidentally, there are 3 hands on here, really 2 primarily. Let me see, 1, 2, 3. Let's see, 3, maybe 3, 4. There it is. There are 4 hands on the card that have 4 pair and are 30 points, but really, comparing to other years, they should be 35 points. Anytime you have 4 pair, it should be a higher point hand. So I don't know what the oversight there was, but just consider that those are more difficult hands. And that would be, well, we'll get into the nitty-gritty of the categories later. So hopefully I'll remember to point out those more difficult hands. But you'll still be playing it regardless of the difficulty, I'm sure. The next thing that I look at is the predominant shapes on the card. So this year, the top count is pung kong, pung kong. That's 3 of a kind, 4 of a kind, 3 of a kind, and 4 of a kind. That is the primary shape on the card. And then the next one is pung kong, kong kong. I like to call that pair triple kong. Then we have pair, pung, kong, pung, pair, which I call a pyramid. An example of that would be the first hand under consecutive run. We have kong, kong, pair, kong. That's another shape, just 3 hands though. These last 3 have 3 each. So you think that that's nominal, but it does matter because let's do the next one though. Pair, kong, pair, and then finally kong, pair, pair, pung, pung. So those are the top with 4% or greater. There are 7 other hands though that have 2 shapes each. And then you can see here, there's a highlight. We're not going to dig into the nitty gritty here, but there are lots of hands with unique shapes. And that I think is significant because that is where the challenge comes in for more experienced players. Even though the easy hands have the highest hand count, the variety is what makes it more challenging for experienced players. So I have heard that some people feel that this is an easier card. I think it's equally challenging every year, primarily because of the variety of shapes. The next thing that I want to share is attributes. Attributes are components of hands. The first one I want to share about is wins. There are only 13 hands with wins on the card this year. With dragons, there are 20. So wins and dragons together are not used nearly as much as the number tiles. But what's important to think about here is that there are 7 more hands with dragons than wins. And we're going to talk about what to do about that information later. So just know that there are more dragon hands than wind hands. The next attribute is pairs of flowers, 21 hands. And pairs of flowers are in every, well, I should say flowers are in every category on the card. Pairs of flowers, not so.
Michele, you're frozen again, unfortunately.
Much. There's like, and let's see, I think that is the only, with Kongs of together, that's 44%. And I would call that nearly half the card. So consider the danger, I guess, of passing flowers during the Charleston and the risk of discarding flowers, especially in the end game. And we'll probably talk about that a little more later. Like numbers has total count of flower hands, just to show you how significant like numbers is. The thing about like numbers is that there are 2 hands in a category, but they're actually all over the card. Mixed suits has 48 hands, 69%, and one suit has 19 hands. The idea here that you want to keep in mind is that while you're gathering tiles to figure out what hand you're going to play, try not to focus on suit. Just keep them all. Keep them all for whatever category you're playing. And then when you run out of discards, decide if you want to play one suit or mixed suits, because one suit is only 19 hands, 27%. Lastly, we have big multiples is what I define as Hong Kong, and then Quint if you have jokers, of course. 84% of the hands on the card use big multiples. With pairs, 43 hands or 61%. Together, that's 91%. This is why I say American Mahjong is a game of multiples. And that is the key, I think, to playing well. And we're going to talk about how to do that next, because card use multiples. So we just want to talk really quickly about hand development. And I don't know if your Zoom window is in the way. You might want to minimize that window a little bit. Okay, so the idea with hand development is that you want to target, gather, build, defend. These are the stages in hand development. So the like to compartmentalize decision making. This is a really great way to do that. Target, gather, build, and then defend. Sometimes you're going to have to retarget because 91% of the hands of the card use multiples. Just in summary or takeaways, American Mahjong is a game of multiples. Target multiples to optimize hand development. If you don't have multiples, build around the predominant pattern. Eventually, a multiple will form. It's inevitable. That's when you reassess completely, targeting the multiple, gathering tiles to support it and play a category that uses most of your tiles, and then build. Once all the gaps are filled, then you build up, because eventually you're going to need to have multiples throughout the hand. Let's talk about the categories now. Odds is the first bar. This is where most of the hands are in the category, and this is typical every year. Odds has the most hands. There are actually 21 other hands throughout the card. So 14 hands with hand down under Winds and Dragons has a 1, 2, 3. You can see there are 2 odds there with 1 and 3. So depending on where your sequence is, that number may go up or down. With consecutive run, there are 11 hands in the category. So it looks like there are fewer, but there are 15 other hands outside the category for consecutive run. So even though there are fewer, there are other hands elsewhere, plus you have 9 tiles in a range. So you can go up or down the range, which makes it a more flexible category. The next category with options would be Winds and Dragons. At 11 points, there are 2 hands outside the category with Winds. The first quint and the year hand with that little news. We have Evens as well with 7 hands, but there are 4 hands in addition category that are even. So even though there are only 7 evens, there are evens elsewhere on the card. Singles and pairs, the only real difference here is that there are no wind hands this year, which kind of surprised me. Usually the first hand is a wind. I was a bit surprised that there was no wind hand. There's a dragon hand, itty bitty dragons, singles. So I suppose that you could potentially switch up to winds depending on how the hand develops, but it's pretty minor usage there of winds and dragons. The year hand a unique use of the tiles. Usually you have a Kong of flowers with 2 Kongs of numbers and then a singles in the sum. But this year they're using evens or like numbers and evens for the sum.
Yeah, Michelle, I don't know if you can hear me. You keep freezing. Michelle, can you hear me?
Let me hold on.
You keep freezing, Michelle. So maybe, I don't know if maybe you should log out.
Okay.
And come back in, because you're freezing almost every single analysis point.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'll exit and come back. Should I start the presentation over?
I think if everybody feels the same way too, I think we're fine for where we are, but let's just see if we can
Okay.
start up from here again. But I think maybe there is something off with the connection, I think.
Okay.
So
Let me
log
go-
out and I'll let you log and we'll reboot you in. Let's see how
Okay.
that goes. Or like you said, maybe, sometimes it's
Yeah.
control.
I will log out and come back in. So
Okay.
sorry for the trouble.
I'm sorry for the delay, everyone. I guess connections from here to Georgia, who knows what's going on in between. Okay, you are back.
Okay. Am I freezing at all?
No, you look, and you weren't freezing in the beginning either, so I'm not really sure.
Well, I checked with my
Who knows?
husband.
We think technology is always working and sometimes
Yeah.
just not our friend.
My husband's working from home today and he said he's having the same problem. He's going to look and see if there's some kind of a outage or some kind of technical problems. But shall we keep going or do you want to reschedule?
Oh, no, I think we can let's keep going.
Okay.
I'm ready to keep going, and I
Okay.
think we can pick it up if anybody wants to say in the chat if they want. But I think we can continue from where we were, because now we're really getting into more of you're going to start talking about the different levels.
Yeah.
So I think we can all keep up.
Okay. Okay. Can everybody see my screen now? Yep. Are we good? Okay.
Yep, perfect.
Okay. So with addition, the reason why when I first looked at it, I thought, wait a minute, why are there are mixed suits? We don't have a one suit option. The reason for that is because they're using like numbers. You can't have one suit if you're using like numbers, because we need like numbers from the different suits. That's why it's like that. So it's just kind of different. And I haven't won a hand with it yet. I've tried a couple of times, but I just don't seem to be getting the right numbers. And it may just because it's really different compared to most years. The quince category has 3 hands and the usage is like numbers and consecutive run patterns. Oh.
There is an unplanned outage in the area. It's bouncing from me into it.
Okay, so you think that's affecting it? There's an outage in our area that's affecting our bandwidth.
Yeah, I keep getting kicked off of work.
Okay. Did you guys hear me? Did you hear me? Okay. All right. So we'll just do our best and I'll try to observe you, Linda, to see if there are problems. So I apologize. Okay. So like numbers. And I kind of feel bad about this right here because like numbers it's kind of one of my favorites to play like number hands. And they're all over the card. So even though there are only 2 hands in that category, they are all over the card. And we're going to talk about that more later. Just remember 40%. It's not, I wouldn't call it nearly half, kind of like with flowers, but it's close. They're all over the card. So the takeaways here are gather and build around the strength of the hand. And just as a reminder, the strength of the hand is going to be multiples if you have them. Multiples are pairs, tongues, tongs. If you don't have those multiples, focus on the predominant pattern, which is going to be a category on the card. Then when a multiple forms, reassess and build around the multiples, because that is the strength of the American Mahjong hand. Choose a category that uses the strength of the hand with most of your remaining tiles. If you are between categories or hands, depending on where you are in hand development or gathering, choose one where there are no gaps. That would be, so for example, if you're thinking about playing odds and you have 3, 5, 7, 9, but no 1, well, you might think about playing 5, 7, 9, or if you get 4s, switch to consecutive run. So just keep in mind any gaps that you might have and use that to help you make your decision if you're in between. If the choice is equitable between categories or hands and one of those is consecutive run, go for consecutive run just because of the flexibility of that category. And we'll talk a little more about that later. Here are some findings with actionable commentary. 2, 3, and 4 are going to be the most used this year, in my opinion. And that is because of the year category and because of addition. That's the ripple effect for this year, 2, 3, 4. 4 is in there because it's part of the most efficient tile set. Like if you look at the suits, the numbered suits, there are 9 numbers in the suit, and you can go up or down in that range, but 4, 5, and 6 are right in the middle. So typically they're going to be more used than the outside tiles. So 4, 5, and 6 are most efficient, and that's why 4 is included with that 2, 3, 4 as most used, considering the year category and addition. That is my opinion, and I'm not a statistician, but I've been playing Mahjong a long time, and this is, I think, going to be the numbers to kind of watch out for. If you're playing consecutive run, you might even consider starting your run at 4 or even 5, because 2s and 3s, and sometimes 4s to a lesser degree, are going to be hard to get. If you have a really good representation of those numbers, then you should be okay. But just consider that 2s and 3s primarily, and then to a lesser extent 4s, are going to be hard to obtain, especially if people are playing the left panel of the card. Choose options with no gaps and few weaknesses. Weaknesses, I did explain gaps before, but weaknesses would be, for example, if you need pair, pung, kong, let's say you're playing the third hand or second hand from the bottom under consecutive run, Kong of Flowers, pair, pung. Let's say that you have singles for your pairs. So you have a 1, 2, that singles, those would be weaknesses because you need to have pairs there. If you have one pair and a single, that single would be a weakness for that particular hand. And then if, let's say you have no 1, but you have the 2, 3, you might not even consider playing that because there's a gap with that 1. So think about gaps and weaknesses while you're deciding between your options. Even though a 1 suit might look really pretty, but if you've got gaps and weaknesses, go with mixed suits because there are way more options, and you want to try to place kind of go with a category or hand that has few gaps and weaknesses. While you're making these decisions, always remember that your top priority is to build your hand. And then you do the very best you can with your remaining tiles. And that applies to the Charleston with passes and discards during the pick and discard phase of the game. Your hand comes first, because if you want to play to win, that should have the primary focus. Then you just do the best you can with what you have remaining. I want to just quickly talk about tandem categories, and we're not going to go into them in depth, but there is some content in the ebook where you can dig a little deeper on what I call promising tandem categories. Basically, the tandem concept is where you can have a switchability to another category or hand based on the shapes and tiles that are being used. There's a dependency though. It's based on the similar shapes plus 2 or more tiles. So just because they look similar at one time, the shape of your hand is going to change throughout the game, and it's also going to be affected by people discarding and exposing tiles. So the availability of tiles could impact your being able to build out your shape for any given hand. So think about the dependency and then also the feasibility. And that is going to be based on the number of exposures and discards at whatever decision point you're at. So I have heard that people talk about, well, what's a good backup hand? That really works just for a moment in time, because as the game develops, fewer tiles are going to be available for you to use, especially if you're playing a pair hand or maybe one of the concealed hands with 4 pair. You're not going to be able to use jokers there. How's my performance with the technology? Are we okay?
It's working now ever since you came back in.
Okay, good. So there's a little bit more about this concept in the ebook, and I do a live stream on Monday nights. I call it Nitty-gritty Prime Time, where we go into some of these ideas on switchability and tandem categories and how to switch hands. There's a specific rotation that I do, and one of them is on this topic. So it could have a session all on its own, but I just want you to be aware of it. Look for the common shapes and number tiles in order to determine your ability to switch to different hands. I want to talk about the categories individually briefly. There are 4 hands in the category for the year, but there are 3 of these hands outside the category. You have a year hands in Winds and Dragons, and then you have a year hand in Singles and Pairs. So for this category, the 3rd hand down has caused a lot of trepidation. The league has confirmed that you can use any 2 dragons. They forgot to put a number 2 in there for any 2 dragons. So just know that it's okay for your year to match one of the dragons. You just wouldn't be able to use 3 jokers for the green dragon, or yeah, so there just has to be 2 dragons in there. Just remember that. With the year, I have some powers and pitfalls that I'm going to share with each category for you to keep in mind. And most of them do transfer from year to year, but sometimes not. And it depends on the year as far as that ripple effect that's caused by the tiles used for the year. And then also addition. Addition impacts the rest of the card. Even though there are only 4 hands, it makes a difference if you combine that with nuances with the year. So the powers for the year would be use of dragons. And you can thwart a big year hand by hoarding white dragons. So if you're doing a pung of white dragons, you know you're not going to be paying out that 75-point hand. So you might consider that if you've got white dragons, leverage them, know that you can thwart the big year hand and make use of those tiles. The pitfalls, though, with the year category is that they use only 2 numbers, 2s and 3s. So it's going to be challenging, especially because of the addition hands. You can see that there are like numbers with 2s and like numbers with 3s. So anyone playing in that category, they're going to be vying for the same tiles. So make sure you have a really good representation of 2s and 3s, especially 2s. Also, the availability of news is going to be a key, and that is, you're going to know what your availability is if you don't have all of them during the Charleston. If you don't see wins going around, someone else is likely playing that category. And you can confirm that in the first round of discards. If people are playing wins, you're not going to see them being discarded in the first couple rounds, and that might affect your ability to get news. So keep that in mind if you've decided to play that hand. This category tandems well with like numbers and consecutive run using 2s and 3s. So because of the usage of 2s, if you happen to get 4s, you might be able to switch to a 2, 4, 6, 8 hand. With this category, just make sure you have a strong representation of 2s and white dragons. Watch for dragons being discarded and exposed, because that is going to impact that category. And then watch for 1s and 4s for a consideration to switch to consecutive run. If there are any questions along the way, please stop me, or we can maybe make a note of it and we can go over them in the Q&A. All right, so next we have evens. Evens are going to be affected by the year in addition hands. Here's a couple of examples as to why. See the 2-4, the 2-3, these are all part of evens. So anyone on that left panel, if you have more than one player there working with those options, you're going to be vying for the same tiles. The powers are tandems, which can correlate or be transferable to all the categories except for quints. The pitfalls are they use only 4 numbers, 2, 4, 6, 8. The efficient tiles are in there, 4s and 6s. Since they're efficient, they're more likely going to be used in consecutive run. With this category, consider if you have weaknesses with gaps in singles, you might consider playing that category instead of like consecutive run. Like if you have few 3s, but you've got a strong 2-4, maybe play 2, 4, 6, 8. Watch for fillers though, so that you can potentially switch to consecutive run, which is the most flexible category on the card. And a filler would be if you're playing 2, 4, 6, 8 and you get 5s and 7s, then you could play 4, 5, 6, 7. So just keep your eye out for what I call fillers. With any like numbers, there are only 2 hands to choose from, but they're all over the card. And these are just 3 examples of that. Remember that like numbers are in 40% of the hands on the cards. That's significant. There is a concealed hand that's given people problems. Well, not problems. People seem to be calling for exposures on this because we're used to playing it open in last year's card. This is a concealed hand, so don't let that trap you. This category tandems with everything except for winds and dragons. The pitfalls is you're using specific numbers, and like numbers with 2s and availability of dragons are going to be affected. So if you have a choice, try not to use 2s for your like number because of the year category. And if you can use odds as your like number, even better yet, because of addition. And let's see, I think we kind of covered that in the advice. I'm giving you my advice in a nutshell. All right, next, addition, math play. I call this math play because sometimes it's not addition. They've done multiplication before, but they surprised us with mixed suits because they chose to work with like numbers. And the challenge there is that there's very little flexibility. You can maybe switch to either evens or any like numbers because of the way that they chose to work with the tiles. Big multiples, 1 pair, and then Kongs. So just think through that as you're gathering tiles. The pitfalls are use of 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 specific numbers in each hand. They're specific numbers, so you're kind of strapped to just those numbers. Availability of 2s and 3s are going to be difficult. And then like numbers and evens, there are 2 ways that you can switch. There's just very little flexibility. Maybe have the flowers in your hand before you commit to multiple exposures, because you've got to have those flowers. Otherwise, you can use jokers for your Kongs. There are only 3 hands in quints. This second hand down is a bit of a surprise because there's no flexibility. It's still fun to play. It's very, very close to the second hand down. So, and even the concealed hand, if you happen to get jokers and build up your multiples, you might be able to switch out of consecutive run into quints because of this second hand. I remember playing one of my hands in consecutive run, and I thought when it was over, I thought, boy, I probably just could have played quints if I had discarded my ones and used the jokers differently. So consider that. Big multiples, obviously, with quints, that's the power of quints. If you got lots of jokers, consider playing quints. The availability of 2s and 3s is going to be impactful there. So if you're playing the like number one, consider staying away from 2s and 3s. Same with the consecutive run. Consider starting your run at 4 or maybe even 5. Okay, consecutive run. This is the biggie. This is the one that is the most flexible because you can go up or down the range. There's the greatest flexibility, 9 numbers that you can work with. And there are consecutive hands outside the category, not just within. And here are some examples of that. It's a powerhouse. I call it a powerhouse because of that flexibility. You have 3 suits with 9 tiles each. And that is why it's the most flexible on the card. But you don't want to always play consecutive run. I think the game would get boring. But think about it if you're in between or if you're on a losing streak, you might consider playing consecutive run because it's so flexible. And you probably win quicker with a consecutive hand because of that flexibility. Use of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and the flexibility of 5 numbers in a range. That's the power. The availability of 2s, 3s, and 4s to a lesser extent will impact this though. So watch what's being discarded, watch what's being exposed. If you need pairs and those pairs are 2, 3, 4, be very careful with committing with exposures. Learn how to read your opponents if you can, because sometimes you may not see these down there, but if you see there are no 2s and 3s being discarded and you're starting your run at 2, you might consider bumping it up and go 3, 4, 5 or something like that. Odds has the biggest hand count. It's not as flexible though, because you have a gap in between the numbers. Here's some examples of the odds that are using dragons and like numbers as well in this category. The challenge here, or the power here, is you have 5 numbers, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and then you have options of either little odds, 1, 3, 5, or big odds, 5, 7, 9. And there is one efficient tile in there, the 5. So sometimes if people are playing consecutive run, your 5 could be tied up. So make sure you're watching for 5s if you're playing the odd category. Availability of 3s is going to be the pitfall because of the year category. With Winds and Dragons, there are more options, including 5 hands with number tiles. And there's no wind and dragon hand in singles and pairs, so that's a little unique. Here's a couple of examples of the wind hands with the number tiles, including a year hand. There is a gotcha with the first hand. It took me a while with this one to figure out what they were doing. There's 2 shapes, Kong, Pung, Pung, Kong, or Pung, Kong, Kong, Pung. So just be careful when you're making your exposures to be sure that your pungs and kongs are in the right place. Dragons have a very nominal change between the years, but there are 7 more hands with dragons. When you're playing, consider passing winds before passing dragons because there are way more hands with dragons. If you're more freely passing dragons, you could help your opponents if they're in a dragon hand. But it's not bad to pass winds and dragons. Just try to pass them one at a time if you can. If you're passing 2 winds, for example, you could really fill a gap for anybody playing a news hand. So think about that. The powers there would be news and dragons, of course, winds and dragons. The availabilities of 2s, 3s, and 4s will make that a little difficult, especially with the year hand. And let's see, winds and dragons 3, 4, and 6. Watch for dragons. Dragons on the loose. There aren't that many dragon hands as opposed to number tiles, but dragons are in almost every category on the card except for quints and addition. Wins typically go down early. You'll typically see a round or two of discards with wins. So if you're in wins and you're not ready to call and you see them go down, you might consider switching out to a number hand, a hand with number tiles instead. So being fully aware during the first couple rounds of discards is the key to playing in wins and dragons. With 3, 6, 9, it's very challenging because there's only 3 tiles, 3, 6, and 9. Just make sure that you have a really good representation of those tiles if you play this category. And the switchability is not real good because you've got a big gap between the numbers. So if you have a strong representation, go ahead and play in there, but know that the switchability is very limited. Typically, you can switch to odds because of 3 and 9. And 3s are going to be difficult. You see 3s a recurring pattern in here as far as the pitfalls. For singles and pairs, I shared before that in the categories on the card, there's one hand for each single and pair except for wins. But it's going to be just as challenging. I think people are enjoying the 3, 6, 9 with single dragons. And then, of course, the big year hand is always fun. These hands are high value. Be very mindful of 2s, 3s, and 4s. And if you start getting jokers, just switch to the category for that particular hand. Like if you're playing 3, 6, 9 and you start getting jokers, maybe switch to the 3, 6, 9 category. Just a few notes on the back of the card. There's no changes that I caught. Let's see, the white dragon also is used as a 0, so it is a neutral tile. It applies every year. They, for some reason, removed that from the first panel on the inside of the card. You can never use a joker with a block of tiles that has singles or pairs in it. The problematic parentheticals we have, I explained this hand here already, third hand down under the year. And then also the fourth hand, it should say any 2 suits. I think their parenthetical here is a bit confusing. If you just remember any 2 suits, that's all you need to know for that hand. The 3, 6, 9 hand, this is the 5th one down. The Kongs are any like number, but it could be a 3, 6, or 9. It should have said, I think, like numbers 3, 6, or 9. So you can't use a 3 and a 6, for example, for that. It has to be like numbers, but 3, 6s, or 9s. You know, due to time, we're not going to talk about the carryover hands. These would be the hands that repeat on from one card to the next. I think probably you've had time to see the hands that are repeat. There are several of them, and this is all in the ebook also. I think our time was a little messed up because of the technical troubles. The fatal errors this year are pungs of flowers. Last year we had pungs and even double pungs. This year the flowers are either pairs or Kongs. So if anyone has a pung of flowers, that would be a gotcha. The hot commodities are really pretty much, I've seen a trend since I've been playing American Mahjong. It's these tiles every year. The year tiles, news, dragons, and flowers. These are always going to be very risky to pass and very risky during the end game. And of course, fresh tiles or tiles that haven't been seen yet, those are always going to be risky. But these tiles typically year after year are going to be risky for passing and very risky during the end game. If you are trying to discard one of these tiles, it's nice to get them out if you're not using them early. There are no safe discards. All the tiles in the set are used as singles or pairs. So there are no safe tiles. Usually people are hesitant to discard a white dragon in the end game, but because of the year block, but every tile can be used as a single or pair. So just be mindful of that and look for 3 tiles and just do the very best that you can. If you happen to discard the winning tile, congratulate the winner and move on to the next game. Okay, tips for a smooth transition. Passing risky tiles in the Charleston. That's what these tiles right here, these are all very risky. And sometimes if I get these tiles, I'll make use of them as opposed to passing them. I'll just try to hold them and use them. That way I don't have to pass them, or else hold them if I have few of them and discard them in the early game. The next mistake is claiming a discard for an exposure on a concealed hand. And I actually did this on that any like number concealed hand. I was playing, I had 2 punks out. Thankfully, I didn't mahjong with a mahjong an error, because I had caught the error and I had to switch, but it was too late in that particular game. But I can't believe I fell into this mistake, and I've been playing for years. So even experienced players make mistakes with a new card. Just make sure that you double check the card for the C or the X when you make your first exposure, and you'll be okay. Playing a hand from the previous year's card. This is where it's really good to just double check the card before your first exposure, so you don't paint yourself into a corner. Focus on strength. This is the primary, really the big key for American Mahjong. For flexibility and to optimize quick hand development, target multiples. If you don't have multiples, target the predominant pattern and gather supporting tiles. Play a category that uses most of your tiles, and then discard or do the Charleston, depending on where you are in the game, just as best you can with whatever's left over. Build your hand, let that be the first priority. If you don't have multiples, build around the predominant pattern, which is going to be a category on the card until a multiple forms, then target the multiple and start over. It's best to work from the multiple. Let the multiple drive the decisions while you're building your hand, because 91% of the hands on the card use multiples. You're going to need them eventually. Why not start there? That's my opinion on the best strategy for American Mahjong. Practice makes progress. I have a lot of videos on skill building exercises that you can do at home with your own tiles. My ebook will have a link to all those things, so you can check it out on your free time. Play often and observe. Play with peers to relax and have fun. Play with advanced players to learn just by watching what they're doing. Especially if you play in a 5th player game, you can observe and walk around the table and see how people make decisions. It's a really great way to build your own skills just by watching others play. Play online between games if you can, and watch my videos. So I'm hoping that you're feeling more like this confident ninja bird at the end. You're going to be able to slay the table. If this helped you gain a little bit of confidence, I hope that that is the case. And let's just hope that nobody's this center bird that's frazzled and panicking. So just breathe and focus on strength, and you'll be fine. Also, I have a great website with lots of information, especially that wiki. So please look for Maj Life. That's my new brand. If you just type hashtag Maj Life in Google, you'll find me. I also have a YouTube channel with thousands of videos, and I go live 3 times a week for American Mahjong. So maybe we'll meet up at a live stream. And then you can also follow me on Facebook. And that does it for this presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Michele. I don't know if anybody has any questions. If you want to unmute yourself, or if you want to put it in the chat, I can look at it in the chat. So I would say, so you did kind of go through quickly from last year to this year. So what do you think, or maybe I was missing it, what do you think became a little trickier this year from?
I think it's the pairs for me. I found myself really struggling to get pairs. I was playing, for example, that second hand from the bottom several times. I had one pair in a single and somebody put up a pung, but I was already committed with my pungs. So there's when you have 2 exposures and you need 2 pairs, it's kind of gotten me several times. So I'm thinking, get my pairs and then have 2 exposures once my pairs are in my hand. So
Yeah.
I would think about that. I think the pairs are the struggle. And then single dragons are in the 3, 6, 9 under singles and pairs, and then the concealed like number hand. if you're playing one of those, make sure your dragons are in your hand before you commit or go too long in the game. Both of those examples are concealed, so it's not like you're going to be committed with exposures. You should be able to go to another hand, but it depends on where you are in the game. If you're in deep and you're in the end game, you may not have time to switch out. So just keep your eye on dragons. So I think as summary, pairs and dragons for me. Has anybody else had another experience? Maybe not.
Well, I think I'm newer than probably, I mean, I have been playing for a couple of years, but maybe newer than most. And I haven't seen the addition hands, the math hands to my knowledge. So it is helpful when you're sitting there saying the like numbers, like I have to remind myself to look at those addition hands too. If it's not coming together on the like number, it can fall into the addition hands. So that's something I'm trying to look out for. And a couple of the consecutive runs too, like the third one down, it is really could also go with the addition hand if you're using the right numbers too. So
yeah, if your addition,
finding what you were saying before, finding what are the flexible points.
yes, like with addition, if you have like numbers exposed and maybe the flowers all go down or in exposures, like two players have Kongs of flowers, well, you're not going to get your flowers. So maybe you can switch to the first like number hand that uses jokers, or maybe even a like number hand elsewhere on the card, because they are all over the card, like in consecutive run. There are like numbers in 3, 6, 9, really every category on the card, except for wins and wins. It's wins. Like numbers are not in wins this year.
Michelle,
Yes.
I play with a group of very experienced players. And I know last year they told me that one hand I kept playing like, oh, that was too easy to play. I should stop playing it. What is the hand this year that is considered to be very simple?
The simplest hand would be when you have 2 pungs and 2 kongs. Sometimes it's pung.
That's what I thought.
Kong, or pung kong, which is what it is here. Any hand where you can use jokers in every block,
Right,
those are the easiest hands. But my saying is any win is a good win.
Absolutely.
If those are the tiles you get, play them.
Right.
And if someone has a comment about it, well, maybe they're on tilt and they're not happy because you just won an easy hand. Well, any win is, and I would even say that any win is a good win.
Right. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, if there's no other questions, I am glad that we were able to it worked out perfectly once you relogged in. This is what happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Doesn't go according to plan, and that's what, as in the Mahjong, that's when you got to pivot, right?
Yep.
And go
we pivoted and we got on the fast track. So I know I
Absolutely.
went a little fast on the presentation with the technical troubles, but you'll be able to dig in deep with that ebook. And if you ever have any questions, you could always send me an email or come to one of my live streams, and we do all kinds of banter, and you can ask questions during those live streams too.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Michelle, and thank you
welcome.
everyone. Nobody logged out during it. We were all eager to wait and to listen to this, so it was worth it. And like I said before, I will send up a follow-up. It'll have this recording in it. It'll have the ebook, and in the ebook are the links to Michelle's website, to her YouTube's. Your YouTubes, I think probably everybody here has, I'm assuming, has watched them, and if you haven't, you should, because they're so helpful, especially getting through new cards.
Yeah.
With that, I'd like to thank you everybody very much. And I'll be in touch. And Michelle, I'll be in touch with you. We'll maybe do something, we'll do maybe a Charleston modeling or something working, we'll workshop in August.
That'll be great.
So, okay, everyone. Thank you.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Bye-bye.